Hello, mighty men of God, and welcome to the Real Men Connect podcast, where we help good men become great men. And we do it God's way by helping them with what matters the most. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Martin, and every week we interview some of the nation's most respected and accomplished men of faith to find out what it really takes to become the kind of husband, father, and spiritual leader God has called and created us to be. And each interview session is packed with practical, proven biblical principles you can immediately apply in your relationships, on your job, and in your community. And guys, today we have with us my guest, Jacob Valk, who has worked in various roles in advertising, film in Toronto. And he's co-produced documentaries, Ordinary Commission and Into the Light, and runs the podcast Chats Under the Sun. And Jacob is finishing his master's in divinity from the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. And Into the Light is a studio ministry that partners with Christian authors and speakers to produce documentaries, podcasts, and video resources on biblical sexuality. And Jacob and his partners desire to see a generation of Christians who delight in God's good design for sexuality and are equipped to face pornography, gender confusion, and sexual sin. Guys, we invited Jacob on the show today to talk to us about his In the Light studio experience and their new masterclass video series called Parenting and Pornography, Roadmaps to Raising Children of Integrity. So Warrior Nation, join me in welcoming advertising professional, documentary producer, and fellow podcaster, Jacob Valk. Welcome to the show, man.
My man, it is good to chat with you. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. You
Now,
you do a good intro.
thank you, Jacob. And now I'm kind of confused. You said the studios are based in Canada, but where are you physically located? You in
All over the place. Yeah. So I'm Canadian. That's my background.
right?
And then like we kind of did the whole ministry thing, legal stuff based out of Canada. But me and my film partner, John Michael, we spend most of our time here in Louisville, Kentucky. So we're attending the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary over here.
That's right, because you're currently school getting your master's degree, right? So how long have you been in Kentucky?
I've been here about 3.5 years. So I
Oh,
came down
okay.
here late 21 to start grinding on the old MDiv. I should update some of those information. I just graduated about a month ago with the MDiv,
Well,
which praise
congratulations.
it's pretty cool. I got to walk across the big old podium with the funky gown and everything like that. So I'm working on my doctorate right now.
All right. So are you still at the same school
Yes, sir.
and you're
Yeah.
getting your doctorate in divinity as well?
The doctorate, yeah, PhD in theology, Jesus stuff. So I'll be in ethics, kind of looking at sexual
Yeah, I was going
ethics.
to ask you, is there a specific focus or discipline that you're going into?
Yep,
So
it'll
it'd
be
be
in
ethics.
sexual ethics. Yeah, just again trying to steward this ministry that God's given us, trying to think deeply about these topics so that we can be as helpful as possible.
Jacob, I can't wait to talk to you because I'm looking at what you're doing, what you're studying. I'm looking at what you're doing. I'm like, okay, I'm sure there's a connection to all of this stuff, and he's going to bring it all together. But before we get started, Jacob, I always ask our guests when they come on the show to share with us their favorite Bible verse that gives them inspiration from the Word of God. And what has been your Bible, your go-to Bible verse for you, and why?
Huh. I feel like there's a few. There's always a few. I love, Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, where Jesus says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." I
Right.
just think sometimes when I'm facing temptation in my own life, just it's a simple phrase, pure in heart, so they will see God. And I look forward to that one day where I can, walk into the new heavens and the new earth, and I get to see Jesus. I'm really stoked about that.
Now, I'm going to press you, Jacob. And of course, I didn't have this planned, but and I told you before we came on here, I said I have questions, but I'm going to follow the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Because when I go to bed at night, I actually recite the Beatitudes if I'm having a hard time sleeping. And I
Okay.
would advise that for any guy there listening, man. First of all, it's the Sermon on the Mount. It's beautiful, but to recite that, I mean, it just ministers to your soul. But that verse that you're referring to, I think that's verse 8 in Matthew. What is it? Matthew, is it 5:8? No, is it? I think it is. Well,
Yep.
pure at heart. How would you define pure at heart? What do you think? How do you interpret that to be for you when it comes pure at heart?
For me, that's such a good question. Man, that's such a good question.
Because we're going to be
I
talking about sexuality and pornography. I'm just
Yeah.
curious.
For me, when I think of pure in heart, I kind of feel like I'm thinking of two things at the same time. One, and I think it's healthy for Christians, we're bouncing between them. One of them is I'm pure in heart because Jesus died, saved me from my sins.
Right.
And so like I'm saved by him. So I like positionally, I am pure in heart. But
Hmm.
I'm also a sinner saved by grace. So I always got to keep my eyes where they should be, keep my mind where it's supposed to be. And so there's that, I'm a man just like every other man, and I have to constantly be reorienting myself. And so in the times where I feel like that pure in heart is a job, I want to remember that no, I'm saved. Like
Right.
Jesus loved that's set in stone. And then times where if I feel like I'm too comfortable in that, I want to then remember, no, pure in heart, that's a verb. That's something you got to keep working on this side of the kingdom. And that by grace, but keep grinding. Don't let loose on that. You know what I mean? Because I know my sinful nature, if I become lazy, if I start entertaining thoughts that I'm not supposed to, it'll pull me down in directions I don't want to go. So I hope that's kind of what I think about those two things.
I love that. I like that because I'm just curious because I think you're absolutely right. I said we have to understand that we are pure because of the righteousness of Jesus. But at the same time, we're actually in pursuit of purity as well. And it's a continuous process. And I never heard anybody say that before about being pure being a verb, but I'm gonna liberate that. I'm gonna use that purity is a verb. It's something that you continually do. And I think what probably made me ask it, I keep thinking about when we pray, we said David was crying out to God, said, created me a clean heart, created me a pure heart. And I'm thinking, what does that really look like? Because David has some struggles. So now, Jacob, most people won't be able to see you because they'll be listening to this on audio, but you like a relatively young guy. I hate to put you on the spot. How old are you, man?
Just turned 27.
All right. 'Cause I'm thinking, dude, I said, I'm like, you're doing all this work and the fantastic stuff you're doing, and you're about to work in I got my PhD at 28, which I thought was relatively young. And
That's
so you
young.
remind me, I'm like, this dude working on his doctorate already? And so you look kind of young. And so
Yeah.
I really can't wait to get into what you're doing, the work you're doing with In the Light Ministries. But let's start with this. I want to, I know you're 27 years old, but tell me about how'd you get into the work that you're doing? Tell me about your home environment. What kind of home environment did you grow up in, man?
Yeah, I got a fun story. So I was born in New Zealand, actually, and um, basically there's all these Dutch Reformed churches that came out of the Netherlands in after World War II, and so there's a little bit of world history. And so these churches kind of after World War II, they just there's nothing left for them in Holland, and so they left and they came to Canada, New Zealand, and Grand Rapids, Michigan. And so I was all my grandparents, they're all immigrants from, that's why I'm like, I'm white as an A4 sheet of paper. And so I grew up in those contexts. So super reformed, frozen chosen, showed no emotion on their faces. God bless each and every one of them. So big on theology, light on emotion.
Hmm.
And like every context, you can look back and say, hey, there's stuff that frustrate me. There's stuff that I don't want to follow, some theological differences over the years. But I'm very grateful that I grew up in a community that ultimately they took their faith seriously. And they had a whole bunch of conservative fundamentalists sometimes, but they did love Jesus. And so I'm grateful for that. And especially my parents too, they were serious. They love Jesus and they did their best, raising a whole bunch of us. So I'm the oldest of seven. Um,
Wait a minute,
they
you're one of seven?
yes, sir. Yeah, oldest of seven.
Lord.
My, my little brother's 12, I guess.
Oh, so 27 to 12. They got, oh, bless their heart.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I grew up on a farm, not a big farm, but a solid sized farm. So it's weird, I grew up going through the forests, working on the cow farm, and now I make films. So God has a weird sense of humor sometimes.
So your parents introduced you to the Lord quite early then? You were a
Sir.
kid?
Yeah, but I feel like this is probably true for a lot of people. I grew up Christian. I think it was sincere. I was faithful, but I didn't. I like theology. I'm a nerd. I love reading books,
Hmm.
but my love for Jesus, it wasn't there, or it was quieted by my ambition. So I had, I kind of, you read in the bio, I spent some time in the advertising industry. I had these dreams, these goals of wanting to crush it in the ad industry. And ultimately, my love for my career was more important than my love for Jesus, just
Hmm.
by a little bit, but that little bit is an eternity of difference. And so, by the grace of God, I got I lost a relationship with a girl I really cared about when I was about 19 years old. And that crushed me. That tossed me into a ditch. And I started really just, my world was falling apart. And I threw myself back into my job, and my job wasn't fulfilling me. It wasn't meaningful. And I
Mm.
started asking myself, like, why am I here? What's the point of all this? And it took me about a year to start putting my life back together and go like, hey, if I'm not doing everything I can to honor God and try and serve him, then I'm not, then there's no point. Then let's make an exit strategy. So I'm really grateful for that. And then I think from that point, I kind of thought my career was going to go more like pastoral, more ministry proper. But when I came to seminary, God in his the crazy ways that God's worked reunited my love of the creative arts of filmmaking, which I had already done a decent amount of work in, with like actually doing stuff that's meaningful with topics that are important. And I had a conversation with a guy named Tim Challies, who wrote a book called Sexual Detox. And I asked him about that book. I said, hey, you wrote this book. Tell me about it. And he's really funny. He laughed and he's like, the book's fine. There are better books out there. He stopped and he's like, we got this issue, this problem of pornography. And it's this pervasive issue. And in answer, we write books. We have a video problem and we write books. There could be
Mhm.
space for a a video solution that really walks through that process and change. Bondage and sin to freedom in Christ. And this is the Holy Spirit. He had no idea that I worked in film. He was just chatting about it.
Wow. Wow.
I left there and I called, my kind of partner in crime, John Michael, back in Canada. This is my first semester here down at Southern. And I'm like, hey, we both care about this issue of pornography. My story is a little different, although related. John Michael, he was hooked on porn for about a decade.
Mhm.
What would it look like for us to reach out to some of these authors and speakers we respect the most and put together a film that helps people think about the problem of pornography? That was years ago. We by the grace of God, we managed, people listened to us. It was crazy. Cold emails, again, Holy Spirit working everywhere. We put together this film called Into the Light, the documentary, and people we had a commitment. We wanted to make it free. If we could, we wanted to make this resource on freedom from pornography free. And so we raised $85,000 in the summer of 22 in order to produce the film as a free
Mhm.
resource, which was such a blessing. And then we premiered it, and God started using it, and so much more than we could have imagined. And then from there, we thought, okay, the Spirit's moving. We're grateful. Let's set up Into the Light as a ministry proper and set up all the budgets and the nonprofit stuff. And and we start to asking people, hey, if we were to make something else, a new resource, what would you want? And everybody said parenting. Like,
Mhm.
there's this problem of pornography. How do we talk to our kids about God's good design for sexuality? What do you say to a 7-year-old, to a 10, like, how
Right.
do you go about this? And so over the next year or two, that brought us to creating kind of like what you said, the parenting and pornography masterclass, which is 9 episodes. It's about 4.5 hours long, that has some amazing authors and speakers and counselors really helping parents think through, how do you talk to your kids about these issues? And I think dads play a unique role in talking to their sons and even their daughters about this thing that God gave us called sex. And so, yeah, we got the opportunity. We premiered it just last week. And because God's good, we've managed to make the resource free, 100% free for anyone who goes on our website, which is intothelightministries.ca, and people can watch it. So I'm grateful. I'm really grateful, and it's really fun after a lot of work to be able to have that done.
And Jay, we're thankful that you did it. And I love what you said earlier about how with pornography is a visual issue, but yet we always write about it, write articles about it, and books about it. But we see a few films about it. And so I love the work that you guys are doing. And you already answered one of the first questions I was going to ask is how you get hooked up and get involved with Intellect Ministries. And thanks for sharing that. And of course, we want them to go watch the master class and take the master class. I'm going to go through it because I wanted to be a resource that I can refer to our men. And I know our guys are listening to this on the podcast as well. And Jacob, we're going to do everything we can to promote it to as many people as possible for them to
I
watch it.
appreciate that.
And
Thank
but
you.
I do want to dive into it because I love the angle because typically when we do shows talking to men, I think I told you I think we're past 900 episodes, man. I think we just released 935
Come on, come on.
this week. And the thing is, we do shows talking about the struggle that we have as men with
Yeah.
pornography, but very rarely do we do shows targeting towards the dads to help the
Yeah.
kids. And I think a lot of
Totally.
times, because the dads, we walk around with a lot of shame thinking, but I screwed up. I told you I'm a recovering porn and sex addict and I've been sober by the grace of God for this now be 18 years
Praise
um,
God.
in February. But very rarely do we talk about how we now transfer, break these generational curses when it comes to our kids and what we should do about it. That's why I'm excited about the project that you guys are working on. So I got some questions to help us at least understand the problem a little bit better and maybe give us some us as dads. You say we play a unique role in this that we can do to help our kids, and hopefully we would inspire these men who are listening to this to go watch and take the master class to go through it. And you're right. I think it says about 5 hours. I think you guys got 6 speakers involved in it, and I think it's like 9 episodes. And
Yes, sir.
so you guys really took your time with this. This is not a rush job on this. You guys really, and you did your research, at least for the little that I've been able to watch. And there was some, and we'll start here because there was something that just shocked me because I think I'm pretty up to date on what's going on when it comes to sexual purity and integrity. But I saw that part of the documentary said that 90% of kids ages 8 to 16 have looked at pornography. Now, I know about the age of being exposed to it, but I didn't know that it's now 90% of
It,
kids.
oh man,
That's crazy.
there's there's no industry, no problem that I've ever seen where the devil more firmly has his claws hooked on people than the issue of pornography. It is every
Wow.
stat that I come across. I got to work. There's a nerd organization called Barna that does a lot
Yeah.
of research.
I do a
Yeah, so
lot of research, Christian research. Yeah.
they rock. If you're a nerd like me, those guys are the best. They're my superheroes. And I got the opportunity to work with them on their latest report
Mhm.
on the state of pornography in the churches. It's all the stats. It's just as common as the world. It's different because Christians fight it. They work hard trying to battle it, but it's there. And yeah, 90%, probably even north. And it's always been men. More and more women, more and more young girls, young teenage girls are getting hooked on pornography and finding it a struggle in their life too. And so it's
See, I
bad.
like the fact that you guys are going there too, because normally you don't see anybody address the girls and women, but women and girls struggle with this. I was in a recovery group for 7 years, and even though they had it, they had to separate the men from the women. But when we used to go to the meetings, I'm like, wow, women are struggling with this too. I was surprised, and that was years ago. And so I can imagine what it's like now with us having so much access
Yeah,
to digital formats of it and being able to get easy access to it, that I got to believe that a lot more women are now struggling with it as well, you
totally.
know. But let's kind of get into what you guys are doing and how you can help parents. Um, what are some of the earliest ways, I guess, that I guess that pornography is impacting kids. If 90% of kids are now being exposed to it, what are the impacts that you guys, based on the research that you guys have done, that you've seen that how it's impacting kids differently now than it did maybe a couple of decades ago?
Totally. Man, it's sad. I'll be honest, I'll probably be saying some things that a lot of your listeners, a lot of guys who've been hooked on porn, you know perfectly well the impacts that it has, right? So I think the biggest one is relationships, man. You have guys who, and it's hard, right? You have Christians who are struggling, they know it's wrong, they're working on it. And then you have people who just don't care. And they're letting everything they know about God's design for sexuality be informed by pornography. And pornography is it's degrading, it's insulting, it's never tied one man and one woman. It's promiscuous. So the stuff that we hear, that the stuff that we've done is like, you know, girls girls being forced to give sexual favors in early relationships before they have their first kiss. Got this twisting of what it means to like, and I don't, you don't want to like romanticize some old time as if they didn't have their problems, but the idea that you court a girl and you take your time, meet the parents, all those categories before you start becoming physical are just blown away. And having like a 16-year-old trying to navigate that is hard,
Yeah.
right? And So, and then a lot of like, I think one of the things we don't often think about pornography is how much it affects the other areas of your life. Because when you're living with that shame, it's hard to look people in the eye. It's hard to cultivate ambition, good, healthy ambition. Man, pornography just grabs you by the ankles and just keeps pulling you down farther and farther.
Jacob, and the thing is, we know that the kids are now even being exposed to digital media a lot sooner. I hate to say this, and I'm putting this out on the air, but we have my wife and I, our kids are grown now, and they're
Yeah.
older, 28 and 22. And but we have godchildren, and the youngest is 3. He
Yep.
knows how to use a cell phone.
Yep.
And I'm thinking, this is ridiculous. Now his
Yep.
parents bought it for him, but he has it when he's with us. And so I'm thinking, I guess one of my challenges, I guess, being a parent, I have little kids anymore, but for the dads out there, at what age should parents start discussing pornography with their children? And how should we start those? And how do we start this conversation as they grow older? How do we keep those conversations going?
Amen. Let's get into it. Actually, I want to do a slight segue
Mhm.
because you mentioned like something that I think a lot of dads resonate with, just this kind of like the technology. How do you get your head around all of it? So we're talking mostly about the parenting and pornography series. We built another series that we launched at the same time. It's on the website, people can watch it. It's called the Tech Safe series. And that series goes through smartphones, tablets, smart TVs, gaming consoles, all the devices we have in our homes and how to lock them down safely so that explicit material cannot be accessed. So they're like tutorials to help, and I get it, frustrated dads and moms who are looking at these devices going, I don't know how to work through this. We want to explain how to make those devices safe.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I just want to kind of throw that out there as another
Sure.
reason. But when it comes to talking to your kids, I think the first thing is like there was an age, 50, 100 years ago, all throughout, where you could afford to wait to have these conversations till they're 12, 13, 14.
Mhm.
You let the barnyard animals kind of teach some of the anatomical stuff. And it just could be a bit, you could wait and it would be okay. Now we can't afford to do that
Mhm.
because if we wait to teach our children about this thing called sexuality, then porn and everything else in the culture will teach for us. And
Right.
so your kids are going to learn this stuff at about 8 years old, and we have a choice. Either we teach it or the culture teaches it. The thing that can help a little bit is there's things you can tell and start conversing with young children about that aren't really sexuality, but can be unpacked later. So, like things about like your body. Hey, God made your body. God made it good. There's parts of your body that are private, but they're private because they're special, and that's good. And
Right.
just you can drill that into a 3-year-old in a good way so that they're going around cheerfully going like, God made me. That's a good thing. There's private parts about me. No one
Mhm.
should touch them except mom and dad, and that mom and dad are safe people to talk about this with. You can unpack that later on in a kid as they get older, having more conversations in ways that then you start talking about sexuality properly. But you're doing so from a foundation of saying, hey, there's lots of examples of brokenness and sadness, but mom and dad being mom and dad, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. And like you can kind of have categories that you unpack. And we're kind of blazing through these, but
Right.
that we do a lot in the parenting and pornography series is trying to lay those foundations that parents can help kind of giving them good scripts to say, good get a bits of theology to kind of start young, and then you can work on that when you're older.
And Jacob, part of the challenge is, at least for me, when I got first exposed to pornography, I was 12 years old at the time. Now they've been exposed to it at 7, I think is the latest data that I've seen. And it's the shock of it if you don't know what it is, you haven't seen it before. So how do we I guess for lack of better saying, how do you introduce it to your kids before the world does it? So they're
Yeah.
not shocked and shamed by it when they do get exposed to it. Because I think about my son when he first got exposed to it, he was about, I guess Kendall had to be about maybe 11 or 12. And he was over a friend's house and saw a film with X-rated material in it.
Yep.
And I was going to mention the movie's name, but I don't want anybody going out watching it. But he first thing he did, he came and talked to me about it and told me about it and how
Yeah.
he felt about it. So it shocked him and traumatized him because he wasn't anticipating. So how do we should we how do we introduce it before they get exposed to it so it doesn't take them by surprise? Or should we wait till it does? I don't know. What do you say?
Yeah, praise God that you had that relationship with your son that he talked to you about it though. That's a beautiful thing, you know? Um, I'll tell you the best way I can go about it is how my parents did it. My mom did a good job, and I'm very grateful for this. When I was so she did this before I hit puberty. So I remember her saying, she said, "You know what, Jacob? Just to let you know, there are sometimes naked videos of like or naked people in videos on the internet." And I was like, "Why? That's stupid."
Why?
I was 10 years old. I didn't understand. I was like, why? That's you. And then she's like, hey, remember we talked to you about sex? We had that conversation. Sometimes people take videos of people having sex on the internet. And I was dumbfounded. I said, why would anyone want to do that? And mom said, hey, don't worry. Just want you to know if you see it, you can come talk to me. That's just drill that in. If you
Oh, I
see it,
love it.
not that's not Christians should not look at those things. But if you see it, you just shut that down and you come talk to me and I won't be angry at you. And that's the framework. And so I remember thinking that this was the dumbest thing in the world. Why would I want to do it? I knew. The other thing we knew is mom said one of the things that was normal for me growing up is I had my phone and I had Covenant Eyes on there. So I had this accountability software. Covenant Eyes is a really good one. Accountable to You is another really good one.
Mhm.
Um, and I just knew my mom knew what I was looking at. And I didn't have a phone back then, but I had my computer for doing my schoolwork on. And I knew mom could look at the stuff that I was looking at online. I didn't really care. I was young, whatever. As I started getting older and I started realizing, okay, that's why people would view naked people. I started to get it. I knew, okay, I could see this stuff. And now I started knowing why I'd want to. But mom's looking at what I'm seeing online. She's got these softwares on there. And you know
Mhm.
what? It's not worth it. I'm going to stay away.
Mhm.
Then as I start getting a bit older, I start becoming more grateful for that. When I started 16, 17, I started going like, man, I got some friends. They're deep. They're hooked deep. I'm just trying to stay away from it. Okay, I'm grateful my mom had those conversations. And so it's this again, I happen to have a really good story with that by the grace of God. But but yeah, but it's those kind of conversations. Just having those, and then my mom said one of the things she would bring up that conversation over and over again. She'd be like, "Hey Jacob, remember we talked to you about sexuality? We had those conversations about it. If you ever have any questions, you let me know." And 12-year-old me would be like, "Sure, mom, whatever." But I always knew if I had questions about it, I go talk to mom about it. I didn't always follow through with that. Sometimes I did, sometimes I didn't, but that was now on me. My mom let me know. And I never felt like this topic was something that she would get
Right.
angry with me about or
Or be
blow up at
shocked
me.
by, yeah.
Shocked by it. It's like, yeah, why would mom be shocked by it? She was the one who told me about it.
She brought it up. Right.
Right. So, and I have a good story. A lot of people don't have a good story. I sympathy. I bet there's a lot of dads hearing this going, man, not my story, either with me
Yeah.
as a or me as a parent. But I want to say, I can say when I go on podcasts and stuff, I have to be careful, right? Because moms and dads listening. But I can talk to dads here. I'd
Mhm.
be like, dads, if you messed up in your child or teen years, you messed up with relationships, you messed up with sexuality, use that as fuel.
Mhm.
You know how much pain it causes. You know how much it hurts. You let that light something in you to say, I want to do something better for my kids, whether they're young or older kids, and maybe you haven't had the conversations you wish you had. You still got time. Even if they're moved out, you still have time to have some conversations. And so, like, I think dads can uniquely play a part in this because I'll say it right now, and you probably said this a million times. Your brokenness, the mistakes you've made, do not disqualify you
Right.
from talking to your kids about this.
Right.
In fact,
If anything, it
maybe
qualifies you.
amen. Maybe the mistakes you've made give
Right.
you an insight into how hard it is, so you can have those real conversations, especially with your sons, because they need it. They need you, and God's put you right there to have those chats. You know what I'm saying?
Nick, I
And
can tell you, man, what a blessing to hear that testimony and and how great God is because your mom was doing something, and I don't know where she got it from, but she felt that it was necessary for her to do that for her oldest son, to tell her
yeah,
son about that. But she had no idea that God says your obedience to Jacob is going to bless other people. Because not only are you in the film industry, but even coming on this show, there's a lot of men that we serve and support. I have older kids, but they got a lot of them got younger kids and don't know where to start and how to do it. But I
Yeah.
think just what your mom said was just basic stuff wasn't difficult to do, but she did it. And I think you just sharing that is going to
Yep.
bless a lot of men out there who are listening because they're like, man, I could do that, and it's never too late to start doing it. Now,
Amen.
but I am curious that I'm surprised that, and I guess you and your mom had a really great relationship, that I'm surprised that your mom didn't push that off on your dad to do with you to say, have you talked to Jacob about this? I wonder, and how did your dad feel about her doing? I'm sure your dad knew that she talked to you about this. How did he feel about it? What role did he play in all this?
Yeah. So it's the first conversation. I remember it really well. I remember where we were sitting, the first conversation we had about sexuality proper. And this part of it, unique situation, I was homeschooled, right? So I lived a little bit more of a sheltered life to begin
Mhm.
with. But my dad was part of the conversation that the whole my dad, and my mom had about sexuality the very first time. I didn't know anything about this stuff. So my dad was there and he explained it to me and they kind of, went back and forth. I think those conversations were more with my mom because I was homeschooled. So
Okay.
because my mom was there more often,
He's your
she did all
teacher.
the yeah, she was a teacher. She did all the tech, right? So she was with all the passwords with Covenant Eyes. And for anyone who doesn't know, Covenant Eyes is a software that people can install. It's an accountability software. So that's why she was more involved. But I also, yeah, it's interesting. I haven't thought about that. I never got the impression that I couldn't talk to my dad about it. I
Right.
probably, it just made more sense for mom to be. And
Mhm.
my mom was just more keyed into the issues. My dad's a kind of a bit of an old stodgy Dutch guy. God bless him.
But
Bit
I
hard
got to
headed.
tell you, but Jacob, I'm so impressed with your mom because I used to train teachers
Yep.
when I worked in the school system, and usually when I hear from moms, they are petrified about talking about that, especially with their sons, because they want to like I want to keep it from them as long as I can. I don't want, and they're usually embarrassed or they don't know how to approach it. They don't want to embarrass their son. But your mom had to have a lot of courage, or at least she felt very confident that she
Yep.
could talk to you about. And I guess her homeschooling you and being there, that kind of made it a little bit easier because she's used to communicate with you on a regular basis anyway. But that is not something that a lot of women are willing to do. I've talked to a lot of moms. They're like,
Yeah.
they always ask me, how can I get, they want another man to talk to them about it, but they don't want to talk to them about it. But your mom showed no fear in talking to you about it. So I'm hoping that will bless men out there to think if she could do that,
Yep.
how much more courageous should you be as a dad to be willing to talk to your son about it and bring up the issue? And I love how she did it. She didn't make it this heavy, difficult
Yeah.
thing, but she kept the door open for you to be able to talk to her. How cool was that?
Amen. And here's the thing, there's kind of this idea, you probably heard about this, right? Where you have the talk with
Mm.
your kids, right? The talk. Man, that's terrifying. You got one conversation where you got to communicate the whole thing to your kids. Good grief, that's the worst. Let that go. Have lots of conversations. So if you botch one, who cares? Then you just
Right.
you bring up the conversation in a few weeks, different time, different context. Maybe you can communicate better the things you're trying to say. If you structure it like, no, 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 I'm not gonna have the talk with my
Yeah.
kids. I'm gonna think this is important. I want to try to do it age appropriate ways. I
Right.
want to keep this conversation going. It takes the stress off of it because it just
Mhm.
means you botch a conversation, gets interrupted with something, you go, no worries. I'll talk about it again in a couple of weeks. I think things like that, little myths that we believe that we got to get it right the one time, you get
Yeah.
rid of those and things just become a
And we got to
little bit.
cover everything in one talk.
Oh, man. Yeah, come on, let's do that.
Yeah, take the pressure off yourself, man. I'm glad you said that. I think men need to hear that too. Now,
Yeah,
what
totally.
about those guys who weren't as, I guess, had the foresight your mom had and saying, okay, I'm going to open this door now before the
Mhm.
boogeyman comes and get them with pornography. I love that she did that to you because you're like, what? Why would they do that? I
Yeah.
love that she was proactive in doing that.
Yep.
But what about the parents who are a little bit late? What are some of the signs that they should look for that the child may be struggling with pornography or even sexual confusion? That
Yeah.
maybe there's okay, I was gonna wait, but now it's time. What should they be looking for to know that I need to do this quicker rather than later?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. And in the parenting pornography series, the speakers talk a lot about that. How to
Mhm.
and the first thing I would say, man, is like, listen, as a parent, don't count yourself out. Even if you got one more year left before they hit college, whatever it is, God's given you that 1 year. And because we're Christians, we don't face these things with condemnation, right? It's
Right.
like there's grace. There's grace for all our mistakes, grace for everything. And you just say, you square your shoulders and say, I'm going to do with the time that I got. And I would say if a parent, if a parent's listening to this and they've never talked to their kid about sexuality, and they don't have filters or anything in place, that's not part of the rhythms of their life, I would say there's a very decent chance. I'd just be honest. It's sad. It's a scary thing to think about. There's a decent chance that your son or your daughter, if they're in their teens, that they're struggling, especially if they're in their later teens. That's a scary thing to think about. But going into conversations and knowing that's quite likely, like the statistics don't lie, that they either have struggled or are currently struggling, just to have that kind of delicacy and just say, and then I think just being real, right? Especially if they're older, 16, 17-year-old, they're hard conversations. My heart goes out. They're difficult, but just being real about it and just being like, hey, bro, if your dad talking to a son, you just be like, hey, bro, there's this. Let's just be real. You're 17. You know that this stuff's out there, and
Mm.
maybe being honest. And again, depending on the age, depending on the relationship, these are hard. But being honest and being like a sincere apology can disarm a lot of things. And a dad saying, hey, there's some conversations I wish I'd had with you earlier,
Earlier, right,
starting
right.
to think about these things now.
Hmm.
Maybe here's a little bit of my story. I'm gonna tell you, son, I messed up a few times during when I was a teenager or later. I struggle with things. I still struggle with things. I want to do my duty by dad to you to just be upfront with you and say, hey, there's this thing called pornography. You know that. You know what it is. I just want to ask you, does that struggle in your life? Because it wasn't mine, or I did these things. So I'm not coming to you as a perfect person. I'm coming to you saying, I wish I'd talked about you, but I'm gonna do my duty now.
Hmm.
That's hard. I get that's hard, but I think a good bit of prayer beforehand, and I think God honors our attempts at trying to have these conversations as best we can. And I think a lot of good's done by that. And I know stories of people who their dads did a lot of the right things. They tried hard, they had those conversations, and they were just sloughed off and they were not paying attention. And it was difficult, it was hard. But then a couple of years go by and the sons come back around and say,
Right.
hey, you know how I basically gave you the finger for those years of you trying.
Hmm.
I was watching pornography. Hey, can you give me a hand now? I'm at a place where I actually want some help, and I know that you're a person I can trust because you've been giving it your best shot for so long. So even if you're a dad, you're trying to have these conversations, and you're get with full like you're stonewalled, keep going, because your kids will remember that. They'll remember you tried, and sometimes that'll give you some opportunities later on to keep going at it.
Yeah, so we got to plant those seeds early because it may take some time for it
Sure.
to take root. What's this? The sad thing about it, Jacob, is that the culture and society and the media, they're not ashamed to expose our kids to it, but we're ashamed to talk about it,
So
and
good.
that's a recipe for failure. But I want to ask you this. We said that typically we kind of ignore the girls because they're
Mm.
being exposed to this stuff. And we always focus on the boys. But is there a difference in how we approach talking to girls about it and boys, or do we do it the same way your mom did it with you, talking to you as a boy? Do you have that same conversation with your daughters the same way?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. I I think there can be. I think especially there's a good role for a mom to play, especially with some of the uniqueness of female anatomy with their cycles, where moms can play that role in like kind of the unique journey that women go on. I think the fundamentals though, you just say it clear and say it simple, especially in their age appropriate. Like, hey, like, especially some of those foundational things when they're young, right? Like boys and girls should both know that their bodies are good, that God made them, that God is not there's this amazing line, I forget who say it, but kind of keying to your really good point. We should never be ashamed to talk about what God was not ashamed to
Oh, I
create.
love it. Hmm.
Right? And it's like you think about it, like God made this incredible, transcendent, beautiful thing called sexuality that's somehow an image of Christ in the church inside the covenant of marriage. That thing's wild. It's one of the most transcendent gifts God gave us. Talk about it. Just talk about those things with your kids. I think for most of it, you can talk just the same to girls and guys, knowing that especially as they go through puberty and as their life unfolds, that they'll encounter more complicated stuff, right? There's that level of sexual like safety that women need to deal with that guys really don't have to care about nearly as much.
Hmm.
But then I think dads take the role, kind of a little more of a role of like, hey, honey, I'm there for you. like I got your back. I want to be a person that you feel safe, and then we get into conversations about dating and things like that, about, the man's role to kind of look out for his daughter as they're navigating the world. Um, yeah, I don't know. That might not be the best answer, but those are kind of some of the thoughts that I would think of.
Yeah, and I think if we can strip away the shame and the, of, oh, I'm scared, and the fear of doing it, because the world is not afraid
Yeah.
to try to educate them on their view of what they think sex should be used for. So we can't be afraid. We can't walk in timid. And it's weird, when I'm in my second marriage, and because my addiction ruined my first marriage.
Mm.
And when God has a sense of humor, I get married again, and my wife has a daughter.
Yeah.
Now I was used to my son raising me. He knows about my mistakes and how I went through it. So like you said, it qualified me to be. And he talks to me. He asks me questions about it. But when I had a daughter, I'm like, oh my goodness, God, you trust me with a daughter? But
Mm.
I had to get over the fear and the shame. I was like, I got to talk to her about this stuff without being ashamed of it. And it's weird now because it's funny. She's now 22, and we've been talking about it so much that now I get nervous because she talks without being afraid. I'm like, I'm still your dad. I don't want to hear this stuff. But at the same time, I'm thankful that she's talking to me about it. But it makes me uncomfortable because I can't believe I'm talking to my daughter about this stuff. But I've learned now to say, you know what, this is a blessing that she could be talking to some dude about this stuff, but
Yeah.
she trusts her dad enough to say, Dad's gonna tell me the truth. And she knows my past. And so
Mm.
she knows that I'm gonna tell her to be honest about it. So we got to get over this fear, man, and this I don't know what's gonna happen, because the world is not afraid to talk to our children about this stuff or expose them to it. But Jacob, you guys do more than just talk about pornography. But you look, I know in your ministries, you guys deal with sexual identity and all kinds of stuff. And so, one of the questions I want to know is about how do parents, and especially dads, how do we combat the messages about sexuality and identity when it comes to our children? Because now we're kind of viewed that if we have this staunch biblical worldview of it, that we're now not tolerant, that we're bigoted, that that we're just hatred and we're hateful people. And it's kind of a hard line to kind of walk. So, how do we balance between what the culture is saying about sexual identity when it
Yep.
comes to sex and walking in sexual integrity and what the Bible says? How do we navigate that as dads and as parents?
Dude, such a good question. Oh, so this is something that I'm really passionate about because often we can kind of approach this. I don't think sometimes we realize how many answers the Bible actually has on these things. So the Bible, like sexual ethics, and we're talking about the big nerdy discipline of sexual ethics, God in Genesis, God presents a coherent, logical, defendable, real vision for how sexuality is supposed to be used. And it's not arbitrary. God didn't just roll, like, the New Testament writers didn't just roll up to the thing and just say, oh yeah, that sin, that sin, that sin, anyways, whatever. It's like, no, there's sin because they're breaking in certain unique ways a design and an intention that is beautiful. And
Mm,
so it's like the only reason that these different types of sin that the culture tries to celebrate, the only reason Christians call them sin is because we have a vision of what is good. And we have a vision of saying, like, hey, sexuality is fantastic inside its context of marriage. Why? To bring together a husband and wife. Why? To create children. It's love begetting life, begetting love again. And it has this rich, rich clearness to it. And so in this series, the parenting pornography series, one of the things that we have a whole section where it's basic ground up sexual ethics, all about identity, all about God's design for sexuality, because it's hard to teach what you don't know. And
mhm.
so we equip the people of God to really know, like to actually get a good theological grip on these things. It allows you to look at culture, especially as we're talking to our kids, and just go, hey, we could look at something like transgenderism, the transgender identity, and say, okay, first of all, I'm going to approach this with the same love that God's shown me for all my flaws. It's a joke that culture says that they're more tolerant than Christians are. Hey, we have our mistakes. We don't have a good track record. But as a Christian, we come to this with a level of tolerance and love that that no one can match because we love because we've been first been loved, right?
Mhm.
And then you can look at this and say, okay, someone is struggling with transgenderism. A, love. B, clarity. We say that God created men and women and they have a purpose. They have a purpose to come together. It's something that is given to you to be a man, given to you to be a woman, not chosen by you. It's not an arbitrary choice, and there's reasons for it. And so I guess I would just say, like, I would encourage, well, I want people to watch the series, obviously,
Yeah.
because I think what's so beautiful in there is it allows you to identify the unique way pornography is wrong, the unique way transgenderism is wrong, the unique way that like same-sex marriage is wrong, in a way that doesn't just say it's wrong arbitrarily,
Right.
but gives coherence to it. And I've been studying this stuff. I'm not that old, but I've been studying this stuff for a long time. And every page I read more, every time I open my Bible, I can just see that sin is called sin out of love because it's protecting something good. God's not arbitrarily just looking at a set of people or a set of struggles and just wants to like get rid of it because he doesn't like it for a random reason. It's because a very clear protection of the good is at stake.
Hmm.
And that's to have people flourish. And yeah, that's why I'm hyped up on this stuff. So I just want parents to be bold, dads to be bold. You don't, if you hold to a Christian worldview, you don't hold to something arbitrary. You hold to something that is historic, that there's 2,000 years of Christian teaching that hasn't wavered with clarity on what God made. You can stand strong on that. And if you want to look at incoherence, we can point to areas, sadly, where the world is just trying to deconstruct anything like what it even means to be a man or a woman. It's insanity. That'd be my
Well,
thought of
Jacob,
that.
this is so good, man. And man, thank you. And it's obviously we can hear your passion in your voice and your
Yeah.
conviction with this and love for it. And I do want to encourage you guys out there to watch the video series. But I gotta ask you this. Obviously, it's made for parents so we can have this bold and courageous conversation and start opening up and be able to be more proactive with our children. But would you advise us allowing our children to watch it with us? Or is there a certain age, or you not, is it more just an equipping for the parents to be able to open up discussion with their kids?
Just good questions. We made it for parents, at
Okay.
least
Because
this
that's what I
series.
got from at least a
Yeah.
little bit of that. I'm like, this really is good for parents. But I'm like, would you let a child watch, children
Well,
watch it?
I would say, you know what? So, we're talking about the parenting and pornography series on intothelightministries.ca, and then the tech safe series. So real parent oriented. If we go back, I mentioned that we made a earlier documentary called Into the Light. It gets a bit confusing because the documentary is Into the Light
Yeah,
and
and
the
then the
minute.
ministry's name.
Yeah, right. Um, that one, we really tried hard to get that for like a 12-year-old could watch that responsibly, I think. And
Mhm.
so that one might be one, especially it's just easier. You can just watch that either like a night, you could just put it on as a movie, especially if you got some mid-age teens. That'll put a lot of interesting like conversations out there. Like, hey, they talked about this. What do you think? It's got the gospel right at the heart of it. That first documentary would be a better one to watch with kids. But hey, my 12-year-old brother was at the premiere of the parenting and pornography series, and he watched a couple of the episodes, and I don't know, he's starting to prepare himself, I guess. So why not, right?
I got a side question because I'm looking at the time and I tell you, Jacob, it's going by really fast. But I got a side question for you because you were homeschooled,
Yep.
and you mentioned that. And your mom was bold in bringing it up as an issue and topic, but you weren't living in a vacuum. You were still exposed to kids your age
Oh
as you went to
yeah.
church, whether you've been on, I don't know if you play sports or anything like that. And I know this is a big concern for parents. So I guess it's not really a side question. It's really an important question
Sure.
about dealing with peer pressure because we live
Oh,
in a society where other kids are not being, they don't have the same kind of parents you have and the same kind of concern they have. So their
yep.
kids are maybe being exposed to a lot more stuff than you're being exposed to. And they're not taught that it's bad or wrong. And I love the way you said it. And we need to start adopting this. We're talking to our kids when it comes to sin, that it is a protection of good. It
Yup.
is meant to protect. It's not to keep you from having a good time. It's protecting what is good. But a lot of
Yep.
kids are not being taught that. They don't know that. So they're coming, so we see them and we're around them. How did you combat the peer pressure from your peers who didn't think porn was all that and hey, this is fun, this is this. And
Yeah.
what advice would you give to parents who have to deal, or at least trying to prepare their kids to deal with that
Right.
aspect of it?
Okay. I will My story, it's not fair. I had it good. My community was super conservative and very tight-knit community, very immigrant culture, really stuck together. So I didn't encounter too many of my friends who would talk about pornography or anything like that
Thank
during.
goodness.
Now, having said that, you know what? I take that back. I worked in the Toronto. My dad for a time worked for a flower, like a greenhouse, where he would go and take plants to the market in the city at late at night, and yeah, basically we sold flowers. And I would go there and I would do little deliveries to the other different places, and I would see magazines that were tucked away in or calendars. So I would at 12 years old, I remember that now. I haven't thought about that in a long time.
Wow.
I would encounter it, but I was just hit with the same set of things. I know what that is. Mom told me about it. Get the heck out of Dodge and don't listen to it. Um, I'm blessed. I'm blessed. I got what I'm hoping parents can give to their kids. I got very, very lucky. But I would say for talking to parents who live in more complex situations, I got so many things to say on this. One, your kids will see pornography at some point.
Right.
Got to put that in your brain. They're going to find it. So it's up to you, especially when they're younger, to start to identify to them what they're going to see so that when they see that naked person, they have a script and they go, yep, I know what this is. Dad told me about it. I'm going to shut my laptop and I'm going to go talk to him because I know he's not going to blow up at me and he's going to be proud of me for coming to talk to him.
Mhm.
That's something you want to do. Now, when it gets to friends and family, this is complex. This is really complex because you know this. Most people see pornography for the first time at a friend's house. And it only
Right.
takes one person who's struggling or trying to make sense of the world to show eight other of their friends, right?
That's how it
So
happened to my son. That's what happened to him.
exactly. So I would say the church becomes really important in this. And I get it. It's not everyone has a good church to be a part of, and there's a lot of hard churches out there. I really get that. But starting to say, if you were part of a good church, starting to say, hey, I've been thinking about this topic more. I've been equipping myself to talk about it and equipping my home to be a safe place. I've set up router level security. I got a Covenantize or an accountable to you subscription. I've started to put these safeguards in place. I'm at a point with my house where I don't think my kids could even find it if they tried. And you can do that. I'll
Mhm.
tell parents, you could do that. This is one of the biggest lies of the devil. He tells parents you can't set up your home so that it's block off pornography. You can. And the Tech Safe series, we do our best to help you. But then you start talking to parents and say, hey, I'm going to have a weird conversation with you, parent. I know our kids are friends. We're pretty good friends. They go over to your house a lot. I've been thinking about these issues. Can I talk to you about them? Because I want to be sure that my kids, when they go over to your house, they can't access stuff either. That's not because I don't trust you.
Right.
It's just because, man, I know how pervasive pornography is. It gets in at all these cracks. It's on the social medias. It's in our gaming consoles. Can we work together as parents and
Mhm.
and see if so that I know that and you know that both of our houses are places that are safe and start to build out that network. And that is going to mean it's going to have some tough conversations. That means you're going to have parents who are going to be a little bit miffed at you because they think you're insinuating something even though you say you're not. That means there might be places where you go, hey, I don't know if we want our kids going there because those parents just don't see the danger and they don't seem to care. I want to be mindful of that. And the reason why, man, the last section of the Parenting and Pornography series, a guy named Justin Whitmore Early, he does a really great job with this. He says,
We actually had a chance to interview him on our show.
no way.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Yeah,
Cool.
Justin's awesome.
Yes, he is.
He said something really well. He said, I'm willing to tolerate a level of danger in the physical world with my kids. I'm gonna give them a bike. Because you know what? You might bust up your knee when you fall. That's okay. That's life. That's good. There's a level of danger in the virtual world that I won't tolerate because I know what 5, 6 years of a porn addiction can do to a person.
Hmm.
And,
Hmm.
and especially here's where moms like I'm gonna oversimplify mom talk relational that's tough. dads have a place where dads can set their foot down and say, hey, I'm going to have these hard conversations as leader of this household. I might be the one that says this family we're going to be careful with, but these family we're having hard conversations with. I get that that's hard. I get that I'm painting an idealistic picture, but I
Right.
think dads have the opportunity to have a level of clarity and kind of put your foot down this, because dads know how difficult this is to start making these decisions in their home.
And Jacob, I'm so glad that you gave us that to equip us. Because I never even thought about, and I feel bad now that I never even thought about when my kids were younger of talking to the parents
Mm.
of their friends about it. All you're thinking your own home, protect your own home. I never thought, man, that makes perfect sense. And at the same time, will get you to gauge who parents are safe and who
Yep.
parents are really diligent about it, who are kind of laissez-faire about it. They're kind of passive about it. So that helps you equip your kids better and say, oh, less time with them, or I can't let them do sleepovers over there because they're not as concerned. So wow, what a man, that's some great advice, man. Some great advice. Thanks for sharing that. I guess I got time for one more question. And I
Yeah.
always like when we close out the show, if I'm always trying to be very mindful of a person who's in a very, very tough situation. Where they hear, the encouragement and they hear the great advice and tips from our guests. But they're still feeling that, wow, but boy, you guys don't understand how bad my situation really is. And
Yeah.
so I want you to kind of speak, if you can, to that parent out there, that dad out there who's feeling maybe somewhat a little bit hopeless
Yeah.
because he notices that now I don't have that relationship with my son or my daughter, and I can tell something's not right. And I did catch them watching stuff because we always like to think pornography is just pornography, but it could be virtual reality, it could be on social
Yep.
media, it could be anime. It could be a lot of different ways that it gets in. And maybe they've seen some things that kind of put their antennas up and say, wow, I think my child may have a problem, but we don't have that kind of relationship. And now I'm feeling hopeless and helpless in helping my child. What would you say to that dad or parents out there who are feeling hopeless with their kids who are struggling? They know is struggling with pornography.
Yeah.
What would you say to them?
Man, grace, grace. Listen, like I think it's you know what? It goes back to that first thing when you asked me about my Bible verse, right? It's like, on one hand, if you're a dad and you know you've blown it and you're feeling shame, rest in who you are as a son of God. God loves you. He redeemed you. That doesn't change. Like, that's something you can just sit in and come at this from a place of grace. And we don't talk about this enough, although you probably do more. Guys are really good at beating themselves up
Oh
over
yeah.
things. Really good at it. And sometimes I need to learn the discipline of reaffirming how God sees me as being more important than I see myself.
Amen.
You've got do the best you can. And if the best you can is only a few conversations here and there because you don't have that relationship with your son or daughter, if whatever the best you can is, do it faithfully, equip yourself, because that's something you can do. You can equip yourself. You can learn as much as you can. And even if those relationships aren't there, if the time isn't there, you do the best you can and God will honor that. You're forgiven for what you couldn't do and didn't do. And now you have a responsibility with whatever the amount you can do. And then you can rest in saying, God's got my kids.
Right.
God loves my kids more than I do. I'm going to be as faithful as I can and let him deal with the rest. And and that's good. That's good. God doesn't call us to do something that we're like unable to do because miraculously, what are you going to do? Claw back the years? You can't.
Right.
Leave that with God right now. Just do it, do the best you can. Have those conversations.
Jacob, thank you for sharing that, and I'm glad that's what we ended the show on, because I don't want anybody ever leaving one of our episodes without having some hope, no matter how desperate or hard these situations may appear to be and seem to be, because our God is bigger than what their problem is. But thank you for sharing that with them. And believe it or not, Jacob, we've reached the end of our show. Guys, but
Oof.
don't you worry, we'll be back to do it again next week with a new guest, new insights, and new lessons. So make sure you don't miss it. But guys, please join me in thanking Jacob Valk for joining us today and being so gracious with his time. Jacob, thank you so much, brother. I really appreciate you, man. You really blessed me and blessed our audience today. I really appreciate it. Thank you, man.
I'm grateful, really
And Jacob,
grateful.
we keep talking about the master class and the video series. Quickly for our listeners, if they wanted to find out more, I know we kept mentioning, but we kind of keep skirting back through it so fast. But if they wanted to find out more about the video series and the ministry that you're a part of and what you're partnering with, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
So you can watch everything we make by the grace of God. We're a crowdfunded ministry, is available for free at intothelightministries.ca. Don't miss the CA. We're Canadian. But you Americans, you jump on there and you can watch it. So they're out right now. You can go watch these series for free or watch the trailers. Everything's on our website. And then, yeah, intothelightministries.ca. And the platform we're most on, if you want to keep up to with what we're doing, is on Instagram. And so we're at Into the Light Ministries. I think there's an underscore in there somewhere, but you can track us down pretty easily.
And Jacob, thanks for sharing that. Because what we'll do is we'll put that as well. Because your people did send us other ways they can reach out to you. And
Okay.
we're going to put all your contact information in the show notes. So guys, make sure, in addition to what he just told you, in the light ministries.ca, we're going to put the Instagram, all that stuff in the show notes. So you guys have a way to follow, reach out, and even maybe get in contact with Jacob. I know he's busy, but I'm sure he'll take time to respond to you if you have a question for him. And so again, Jacob, thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate it. And guys, if you like today's show, please do us a favor if you haven't already. Subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any future episodes that we release, because we release an episode every Monday and Wednesday. But more importantly, take about 30 seconds and share this podcast episode with a friend or family member you love and care about who may be struggling. Maybe like Jacob said, to that parent who you want to talk to about your kid going up to their home, share this episode and let them listen to it. It's the easiest way to bless them and the best way to help us get this program in the hands, ears, and hearts of men just like you. Who knows? The episode you share could be an answer to some man's prayer. So please don't keep it a secret. Hit that share button and bless someone today. Until next time, I'm Joe Martin, your man builder with realmenconnect.com, reminding you that we are males by birth, but we are men by choice. So each and every day, choose to be the man God called and created you to be, because a male is a terrible, terrible thing to waste. So until next time, stay strong, stay blessed, stay connected, because real men do connect. But most importantly, stay in God's grip, and we'll see you next week.